All right, hi everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on sales and operations planning. So today we're going to be talking about how to turn your numbers into action and what is your data actually really telling you. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over the time to our partner Keansa Solutions and Erica Barber. She's going to be the one that will be taking us through this whole session together with Sarabjit as well as Sunil Tadam. So Erica, please take it away.
Thanks very much, Christine. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you very much for joining. I'm Erica Barber, Director of Business Development and Operations for Keansa Solutions. Today, I'm here with my associates, Sarabjit Sen, and Sunil Tirdam. Sarabjit is our Head of Products and Global Delivery from Keansa Solutions, and Sunil Tirdam is Senior EPM and Pre-Sales Consultant, Keansa Global. They're going to be helping to present some of the data that we're going to be showing today and explaining to you where it all comes from. The agenda today, and I'm just going to show you the whole entire screen here. I'm going to turn off my video. The agenda today will be review of a typical sales and operations planning cycle. So we're going to go through a typical plan. A typical cycle generally has these steps in it. Yours might be slightly different, but they should have these basic components in the cycle itself. We're going to go through the basics of S&OP data. We're going to show you a template that we use. What elements must you have? What elements should you have? These are the items that we feel are important on an S&OP template. We're going to continue by telling you how that data is developed onto the platform. So you're going to understand where your data is coming from. You have this data somewhere in your system. It might be in a spreadsheet, it might be on your ERP system, it might be in some kind of an offshoot system, but you all have this data somewhere. So we're going to talk about where this data is coming from, how it is manipulated so that it goes onto our template in a readable form. And then finally, we're going to go through an analysis of 4 different data scenarios and look at the numbers to see what it's telling us. Do we really need to act? Do we need to panic? Or is everything okay? Is everything under control? We're going to go through 4 scenarios that'll show you some real life situations. Does this look familiar? Now, maybe some of you have a very well-run shop. Everybody's already collaborating. But what we're seeing in a lot of cases is all these silos. You all have your own databases. You all have your set of Excel spreadsheets. You're all on different islands, not necessarily communicating, possibly even different offices. And you're not connected. You're all looking at your own data, getting confused with all the information that's on there, trying to tie it all together, looking at all the different trends. And usually by the end of the day, you've got this massive headache with all this information that's coming at you from every direction. So you've got a lot of spreadsheets you're trying to organize, and instead you've got some massive confusion. So this is what we're going to try to sort out. One of the first things that you need to do is have this data all in one place. So this is what our S&OP monthly cycle is going to really do for us. It's going to ensure that we're all looking at the same data, we're all collaborating on that data, and we work together on making sure that all of our plans are coordinated and all of our plans make sense. We start down here with our generating our statistical forecast. Now I've got a step in here that says adjust the actuals. Of course, you can't change the actuals. Whatever has happened in the past has happened. You can't change that. However, we do sometimes need to change the actuals that are fed into our planning system. Sarabjit's going to go into some details on that, on why we even do that. Why would you think about adjusting your actuals? Once we go through the statistical forecast engine, we come up with an unconstrained demand plan. At this point in time, this is the forecast based on our past history, and this is our starting point. It's simply our starting point, because always there's going to be some changes. You're not always doing the same thing that you did last year. but this is a starting point. It's our unconstrained demand plan. This goes into our demand planners. They talk about all the different sources of demand. This would be sales, this would be our distribution channels, this would be different distribution centers that require information or material. This is all put together by the demand planners into a consensus demand plan. They would be communicating with the supply people to make sure that that demand can be met. Do we have enough resources? Do we have enough capacity? You look down here in the capacity, you also have some communication with the capacity people. Do I have enough people to do this? Do I have enough factory space? Speaking of factory space, do I have enough room for the inventory that I want to keep? Or do I need to change my inventory levels in different distribution centers because I might have maybe different requirements or different fluctuations in that area? So I always have to make sure that I have the right level of safety stock, for example. And then the shipping is important because the shipping is actually what goes out the door. So you can have your supply, you can have your demand, but when you're actually calculating your resulting inventory, you have to use the shipping number because that's what actually physically goes out the door. So these people are all communicating prior to the S&OP meeting. These are called pre-S&OP meetings. Everybody's talking to each other, coming up with a plan, changing the plan, looking at their KPIs, your key performance indicators that tell you, what do I need to change? What are some trends that are showing me that I have to act differently? What are special events coming up? A good example is the Olympics coming up. Are you going to be impacted by the Olympics? Is that going to cause your product to be in higher demand? What if analysis. So you've got different scenarios where what if the pandemic continues for another 12 months? What if it doesn't continue and it's, God help us, that it stops, that we're able to control it within the next couple of months? What is that going to do to my business? The other one is, so you can go through these different what if scenarios to see what could potentially happen to your demand numbers. So these pre-S&OP meetings get you as close as possible to a collaborated plan, and anything that you're not sure of yet or not in agreement on would go to your S&OP meeting, your monthly S&OP meeting. And here you would discuss any concerns. Maybe supply is having an issue, so they're asking demand planners to maybe move some of those orders if possible. But this is where you would talk about the different problems that you've got and try to sort it out. So that you do all agree on the final plan. If there are things that you don't agree on, and let's say two departments are at a standstill, you can't agree on a number, that's now going to the executive S&OP meeting. So the executive has to make a decision on what's best for the customer and what is best for your company. So let's look at the basics of the S&OP data. We make sure that we show some charts. The charts are always showing you there's more visibility in what's happening with trends, maybe spikes. These would definitely route you to the right information. We're looking at a point of view here. We're looking at product family B30 and location distribution center 1, and our current year is 2020. Our current period is month 9. Notice how we do have the current month and the year end highlighted. It's important to make this screen as visually easy to read as possible. So this very clearly shows that here's where we are, here is the end of our year, and now we know what our target is for the next few months. That doesn't mean that you have to stop showing data at the end of the year. You should actually show data out at least 6 months, but it's good to know when your year end is, because then you can gauge where you are financially. Your frozen period is probably one of the most contentious topics that we often deal with. The frozen period, you have to restrict. You have to be very forceful in trying to make sure that your frozen period is respected. What happens here is if you change things in the frozen zone, you're going to have expedite costs. expedite costs for getting stuff from your vendors for your raw materials, expedite costs to get things to your customers. You might have overtime because now you've got to rush to get something done, so you've got overtime. It could impact other items because now you have a frozen period where you've got a totally frozen plan of what you're making. If you start making more of one item, all of a sudden you're going to run short of raw materials for another item that's needed in that same period. So it's very important to make sure that you respect that frozen zone. What we find too is a lot of times it's actually your management that is causing you to break those rules. What you need to do there is just show them some of your overrun costs, and they will quickly notice that, okay, that particular quick knee-jerk reaction is not worth it because we're losing a lot of money doing that. The year-to-date number is the actuals up to the end of the last period, and my current year expected is my year-to-date actuals to the last period plus what I'm expecting to achieve in all my plans to the end of the year. And the reason you want to see this is, let's say you're behind schedule in your year-to-date. It could be that some of your sales have slipped a few months. What you want to do is see your current year expected and make sure that your year-to-date actuals, even though your year-to-date is behind, you're going to catch up by the end of the year because you've got those sales. They've just slipped, but you're still going to make it, and your financial numbers are still going to come through by the end of the year. And if they don't, then you've got to make some changes. You've got to make sure your sales increase somehow. The consensus demand is the agreed upon number from sales. We've got a safety stock that usually comes from your enterprise resource planning system, and the safety stock is set at a level that protects you against unexpected fluctuations in demand. My budget is something that would come from finance. So finance comes up with a number in usually the third or the fourth quarter of the previous year. You've got a budget that is set aside. You now have to, each department or each product family has to come up with a certain amount of those dollars. What you normally would do is you would take those dollars that have been given to your particular product family or your area of market. You have to take those dollars and then unitize them based on what products are being sold. And that way you can compare those units against the units in your other plans. The backlog is something that we feel is very important. So this is one of those numbers that is often missed in an S&OP template, but we feel it a lot of times it will give you a lot of information about something that is going wrong in one of the other plans. And we'll see that in a couple of our scenarios. The supply plan should be level loaded as best as possible. You want to make sure that your resources have a nice steady plan of action. You're not doing a lot of overtime one week and then laying off people the next. You want to make it nice and level all the way across. The shipment plan, in a perfect world, which hopefully some of you are in, but most of the people we work with are not in a perfect world. The shipment plan should match your demand. So you should be shipping whatever your customers are asking for. However, there are often differences. A customer might want something earlier or later. There could be some shipment limitations. So we do use that shipment plan number to make sure that we have the correct, accurate ending inventory number each month. Projected inventory requirement. This is an important number. This is per period. So my projected inventory requirement in each period is what I would tell my supply people that I need. So it would be my total demand in the current period, which would be my consensus demand that sales has come up with, plus my safety stock. So that's my total demand, plus my previous backlog. So any shipments that I still need to make from previous periods, minus the inventory I already have in stock. So if I have some inventory in stock, obviously I don't have to make it. That can go against my projected inventory requirement. Now let's see how this data is prepared. It's really important that you've got good, accurate data that everybody can rely on. but where exactly does it come from? What happens to it when it comes out of my enterprise resource planning system? So Sarbajit is now today going to be in charge of our demand planning process in our fictitious company here. He's going to give us an insight into how he comes up with that forecast, how he comes up with that initial demand plan. Following Sarbajit's introduction of that piece of data, we're going to hear from Sunil, who is responsible today for the supply planning side. So he's going to show what he does, the steps that he performs to prepare for the monthly S&OP meeting that we're going to have in our scenarios. So Sarbajit, can you please start with our demand planning process?
Sure, Erica. First of all, thank you for setting the stage. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarvjeet. I lead solutions development and delivery at Keansa. In today's role play, I am in charge of demand planning. And as a demand planner, we have two goals. The first one is to develop an accurate and reliable demand forecast. And the second one is to make this forecast available to our supply side ahead of time so that they can respond efficiently and cost effectively. On the sales sides, we don't really want to miss out on any of the opportunities, but at the same time, we don't want to accumulate unnecessary inventory because we understand that that costs the company. So a good demand planning process actually helps us to attain these two goals. So coming to the app that you are seeing now, that is our S&OP application. We follow a process that Erica was describing a little while ago. It's a monthly process. All the functions and departments, for example, sales or the distribution and inventory management, procurement, manufacturing. So they all use this application for the S&OP planning, right? And then though there are different functions and they're looking at data at their perspectives, it is also a unified connected application with its own workflows, with its versionings, its traceabilities that helps in collaboration. So I will take you through a quick tour of demand planning. Our demand planning process starts with a statistical forecast. So we use a statistical forecast as a baseline for demand plan. In our application, we have an AI-powered forecast engine, which uses historical sales data to predict future sales using time series models. We'll come to it, but before that, like Erica was mentioning, we have to sometimes correct our actuals, and that is not corrected in the ERP system because that is not proper. We have to correct that in the planning system. And I'll explain to you some of the reasons why this is required. Let's give an example. So say that there are sales that were higher because of a promotions, right? Or because there was a social media campaign that went viral, it drove sales to abnormal levels, but what you don't anticipate to repeat, in normal terms. So what people can do here is they can actually go, and you see the blue line called UV correction. So they could actually say that, well, the number that is there for that period is not reasonable. It is caused by certain events that are not likely to recur. So they could go and change it. And this is perfectly traceable. So that means you can always come back and see what was the number and what was corrected and who corrected it. So this traceability is maintained. So going back to our time series forecasting. So as I was saying, we use time series predictive models, and we use the corrected actuals for the inputs to the statistical forecasting. The forecast engine uses multiple algorithms, right? Like you could see a few there, right? In the algorithms table below, that it applies and it tries to predict the future, and with not really the future, but a future which is basically actuals. But then it tries to forecast what is known from what is partly known, and then it tries to pick up the forecast which or the algorithm which has the highest accuracy. And then the forecast that has the highest accuracy, the algorithm that has the highest accuracy, is picked up as the baseline forecast, and that becomes an input to the sales planning process. Right. So this is in summary what we do in statistical forecasting. So coming to sales planning, here this is of a more of a human-oriented process. You definitely have intelligence provided by the system. The objective here is for the salespeople to update their forecast every month. So sales usually is reviewing their data by a product family at a customer and location levels, which they can select. And then based on that data, this template shows them information about what is the statistical forecast baseline, what is the account management forecast, what was the actuals performance so far. So these provide different guidance to planning. And in the end, they could actually revise the numbers because they are more aware of, say, the existing market conditions. They have a visibility to customer orders. They are aware of the promotions that are planned. So based on that, they could actually override these numbers and then they submit their forecast. So once all these forecasts are submitted, they often go through an approval process, and that then becomes an input to the consensus demand planning. So the goal of consensus demand planning is to review the sales forecast, actuals, and of course, to see whether they make sense, right? So the focus is mostly on the product family and the region levels, not so much on the customer. And here we look for products where the forecast were typically not accurate, where there is a lot of variability. And we try to question the assumptions of different sales forecasts. We try to understand the reason why something did not work, or why what is the difficulty in getting to a right forecast or right forecast accuracy. So that is what is one of the goals that we try to filter out, the things that are the products and location combinations that have got very good forecast accuracy. We don't really have to take a look there, but we could definitely go and look at the ones that have bad accuracies. One other key feature over here is that you have scenario planning. So that's what is very prominent in the screen. So here, as you can see, we have scenarios A, B, and C. This is particularly useful when we have to look at a future which is not very clear, where there could be multiple possibilities emerging. So different scenarios can be created. You could make different assumptions, right? And for example, you could have one scenario as what is your sales forecast. Then the other one, you could actually say it's an upside forecast. So you could actually increase the sales forecast by a bit of a percentage or by an absolute number. You could have another scenario, it's a downside forecast, where you could actually look at numbers if they are not that good. So now when you have adjusted those numbers, you can compare the different numbers and scenarios side by side and look at them and try to understand what it means in terms of revenue, what it means in terms of cost of sales. And then you could evaluate the options and then pick up the ones that look to be most likely, right? So that is one thing which is very useful when to model something where you have uncertainties, where the baseline forecast or statistical forecast are not accurate, and you need a greater degree of collaboration and scenario planning to evaluate your options and move forward. So in the end of all this, we need a single consensus demand plan that is given to supply, because that is something that is a starting point for supply review. At this point, I would like to invite Sunil to take over and take you through a tour of the supply planning process. So over to you, Sunil.
Yeah, thank you, Sarvjit. Hello, everyone. This is Sunil Tidham. So I am a pre-sales consultant and a senior enterprise performance consultant, and I work with Keansa Solutions. Today, I'll be working the role of a supply planner. So the role of the supply planner is to make sure that his resources are busy at all time, and he'll make sure that the supply is level loaded, and he'll keep the inventory optimal. And he'll also make sure the customer service levels are set and maintained at all times. So I will now get into a distribution planning template. So here, a distribution planner would would be looking at a product family and a distribution center level. So the point of view would now be changed, and the consensus demand that's coming from the consensus template, which Sarbit has just explained, would then be split into weekly time buckets. Previously, it would be looked at a monthly level, so now it becomes a bit granular. And so here and there, it's also lead time adjusted. And the main measures he would be looking at would be actual shipments, what were his actual shipments, and he can then look at the consensus demand that just came in weekly buckets, and then he tries to look at the safety stock and make sure it's maintained, and also he looks at a supply plan, and try to make sure that it's always level loaded. And using these, the system would then automatically calculate the projected on-hand requirement, inventory requirement, which would be the demand. And here our system would automatically look at it, and then look for show any errors if there are any. So if it's maintained above or below the safety stock, if it's depleting, and so that would be our projected inventory requirement. So our projected inventory requirement is at a distribution level here. So from here, it then needs to be split to a plant level, which then gets into production. So now I would show you a template called finished good plant allocation, and show you how the demand was then split from distribution centers to plants. As you can see, we are at a distribution center one, and the demand is being split to plants here. And as you can see, it's also being split on a ratio basis, like 60, 20, and 20 here. So this is a split ratio that's being split. So this is all happening through a configuration template for a distribution planner. So I'll show you how it happens. So we are in a distribution configuration template, so where the rules are set. So as you can see, for any distribution center that's selected on the top and products on the left, you would be able to select the plants, and this is how the relations are set. And on the below, these were the default split percentages on which your demand is being split to your plants from your distribution center and product, and which could be varied and adjusted by your distribution planner at all times. And on the right, it's getting a bit granular from your plants to lines level, and the connections are also being activated here, so that the demand then flows forward. So from here, I would get into a rough cut capacity planning view. So this is where a production planner would then look at a plant and the allocated demand, and then look for exceptions in terms of overcapacity or machinery or maintenance. So we are in a rough cut capacity planning view template. As you can see, we have a product family selected. Okay, now I would want to do a planning for week 36 and see if I have any exceptions for a plant A. So on the left, I just see plant A, and this is how much it is allocated, and this is what is available. So as we can see, the allocated is less than available. So it says the utilization percentage, which is 98%, which is under, which is fine. But when it comes to line level, we see an error for a line 9. The allocated capacity, it's showing a highlighted part here where it says an error. So this is an exception. So it's because the available capacity is less than the allocated. So but we can adjust it between our lines. So as a supply planner, what I can do is I can adjust these numbers. So I can override the numbers here on the right and see I can allocate it. Now I would say, okay, 25% goes here, 37% goes here. 38 goes here. All right, I just made sure it's 100%, and okay, that fixed it because the allocation error has been gone and it's under allocated. It's a good capacity. So this is how a supply planner can fix some of the issues. And now if he comes to another plant, which is plant B, okay, we see that there is an exception here at a plant level. There is more allocated and the availability is less. So that's the reason. Even we have an issue at a line level. So we would now see what's the issue. It says it has maintenance. So to fix this issue, I just need to increase my capacity for that day. So what I can do is I can get into another configuration template, which is production config, and see if I can change my maintenance here. So by changing the maintenance, so by changing the maintenance calendar, what we can do is we can push the available capacity that's there on that particular day to the next week, so that what happens is like we can always see if for the next week. Okay, right now I'm in the maintenance calendar. Okay, so we are planning for plan B. Plan B and see that okay, there's a maintenance, right? That's why the system says there's a maintenance. So now I want to move this maintenance to the next week. All right, so now that we have moved the maintenance, now I'll go back and see what's happening. Okay, I need to be at plan B for week 36. Okay, so I see the maintenance has been moved, so I don't see an issue. All right, so but if we go to week 37, since we have moved the maintenance and see what's happening. Okay, so the maintenance has been moved to week 37, but so and the exception is moved, but this is something the issue has been postponed, so but it's not fixed. So this is something as a supply planner I would take it to an S&OP meeting, which cannot be fixed by supply planner, and then get reviewed and see what would be my options. So those are some of the exceptions the supply planner would go through in a daily life. And from here I'll now get into command center, where we look at some KPIs. The subject would walk through the KPIs.
Well, thank you, Sunil. So we have now looked at both demand review and supply review, right? So both sides have done their part of planning. Now it culminates into this view, and this is a very important tool because what happens over here is that it provides a single window view of all the S&OP related KPIs, right? And here we could actually see how the company has been performing and how the performance is going to look like in future, right? So you could actually see past performance as well as future performance and exceptions. So like you are seeing over here, right, we are looking at revenue. So last 6 months revenue, last 6 months products by revenue, right? So we are looking at revenue generation, contribution to revenue for key products, contribution to revenue by key customers, right? So all these are mostly sales related. And then we are also looking at variance from plan. We could look at the contribution by different product segments. And then we are also looking at the last 3 months shipments and the variance from plan for shipments and productions as well. So very cross-functional and diverse metrics can be shown here. And as we scroll down, we can start looking at certain parameters which are specific, like if you're looking at your forecast qualities, you can look at your distribution performance, right? So you're looking at what kind of shortage over total orders have you seen? Are you forecasting for the future 6 weeks, right? Is it good or bad? Is it something that you need to take care of? Your organization definitely has that understanding of what is good and what is bad, and they can actually act on it. Like you could see on the right hand side, you could see a projected backlog. So here we know that in the weeks to come, there are 2 weeks where there will be a lot of backlogs accumulating. That means our fulfillment will be affected. So something needs to be worked upon, right? So similarly, as we scroll down, we'll gradually see production related KPIs, we'll see sourcing related KPIs, and so on. So just to get an idea that it is overall showing us the key metrics for different functions and also what has worked well and what may not be working so well going forward. So why it is very important for the S&OP meeting is that this gives us different hints, like which KPIs over here need attention, which needs to be explained in the S&OP meeting, which needs to be discussed in S&OP meeting. And it also shows us the exceptions that we were not able to manage in demand and supply review, which we have now go and possibly need greater deliberation. We possibly would need more executive decision making, right? So that is what is happening in this view, and that is how it becomes a very important tool before we walk into the S&OP meeting. So with this, I would now hand it back to Erica, because she will now start running the S&OP process. So over to you, Erica. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Sarbajit and Sunil. So now that we understand how we get that data, what we're going to do is going to go through a few scenarios. And when you look at all this data, there's a lot of data that can look very confusing, but what you need to do is get used to the data, get used to how it's presented, and understand how to get to the story. So by the story, we mean, what do we need to do based on what the data is telling us? So let's look at scenario one. We've got a growing backlog, but we've got high inventory. So we've got, if you notice here, we've got the backlog is growing, so we're missing more and more shipments as we go along, but we've got lots of inventory. So what is happening? If we've got all this inventory, why are we missing shipments? So right away, those would be highlighted as being a problem. So we've got to look at what exactly is causing that problem. You have to keep looking until you find the source, because the problem is not that we have a lot of inventory. The problem is not that we have a lot of backlog. We have to find out what is causing that problem. These are just symptoms. The backlog calculation itself is the previous backlog, which in this case, it's starting in November. We've only got 14 units of backlog. That's very, very small. Plus our consensus demand. So here's what we think we should be shipping out, minus my shipping plan. So my shipping plan here shows to be 35,000. So I'm actually not shipping what is required. So I'm going to go back to Sunil. Sunil is our supply planner, and I'd like to get an explanation from him on why we're not shipping what we should be shipping to our customers. Sunil?
Yes, Erica. So the reason for us to have been missing these shipments is because we are having a transition from vendor management inventory to self-managed inventory. So due to this, we are missing the shipments. We are doing this because we wanted to own the logistics to manage the costs better. So we are working towards fixing this issue in this couple of months, so that we will get familiarized with the process, so that we don't miss shipments anymore.
Okay, thanks, Sunil. So in summary then, what's happening is we're trying to reduce our shipment costs. We're going from vendor managed inventory. We're going to have our own transportation system. Now, what we need to do here is we need to keep an eye on this, because we are going to run into trouble in December. If our demand stays where we plan it to stay, we are going to run into trouble. So what we need to do is we just need to keep an eye on this. Make sure that you're talking to the demand people. If that demand cannot be shifted, then we'll probably have to take maybe a third-party logistics supplier so that they can help us out in the short term. But definitely something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Our next scenario is a growing backlog again. So we again have a growing backlog, but our inventory looks pretty stable. There's not any excess inventory there that we can ship out. So now what the shipment plan is below my demand plan. So we're actually shipping less than what the customer is requesting, but we don't have enough inventory to change this. So we have a problem here. We should be shipping more, but we can't. We don't have the inventory to do that. Our projected inventory requirement is growing, but we're not keeping up. Our supply plan is steady. It's what it has been in the last little while. It's been about 10,000 units per week with no shortages. So what is causing our problem then? Why is our projected inventory requirement growing? We keep needing more and more, even though our plans have been stabilized. The part in the equation that is changed is our demand number. Look at our demand number. It is much higher than what our plan was last month. And I know that because you should always have a copy of last month's plan so you can tell where the big changes have occurred and what is causing the problem. So let's check with Sarbajit to see why these numbers have gone up all of a sudden, and what is your confidence level, Sarbajit, on these numbers? Should we start changing our supply plan, or are these just kind of a wish list numbers?
Erica, the reason for the numbers going up is because a new variant of B30 has really picked up in the market, which is performing better than what we had anticipated in our initial plans. We got those rushes coming in from the channels in the distribution initially, which we also cross-checked. We have spoken to them and we have tried to confirm that these numbers are realistic. And having got ground level feedback, we are pretty sure, Erica, that these numbers are going to stick. So my confidence on these numbers are very high, and I think we should march towards that.
Great, thanks, Sarbajit. That's a good problem to have. We've got more demand than what we expected earlier in the year. So what we're going to have to do, and this is why an S&OP process is very good. We see 6 months, at least 6 months out into the future. It should be minimum 6 months, but better if you can make it longer. Because we're seeing it so early, so here we are, we're in September, but we see that problem coming up 4 months from now. And it's definitely a steady problem, and it's a good problem. We've got more demand than what we originally planned. So now we still have time for Sunil to put together a different supply plan, increase the supply plan so we can meet that extra demand and get extra sales that we are hoping to get here. So this is good. We saw it early enough. We should be able to react to it. Our next scenario, we've got growing inventory. So our supply plan seems to be well above my projected inventory requirement. My projected inventory requirement is 33,000 in December, and it's actually going down. It's down to 20,000 in March and April, and yet our supply plan is up at 44,000 level constantly. So we're building up all this inventory. And I think we need to check with Sunil to see why we're building up all this inventory. Have we got a problem?
Yes, Erica. So we are building up this inventory to serve a planned promotion that's coming in May. So we are trying to level load the production, so therefore we can avoid costs of overlay, layoffs, expected costs of raw materials. So this accumulation of inventory is a good inventory, Erica. So we got the situation under control.
Okay, good news. So the point here is not all inventory is bad. Only excess inventory is bad. So here what we're doing is we're building up the inventory, which is the right thing to do if you're expecting a large amount of demand here. So instead of having a lot of overtime in March and April because you've got to make up for a very high demand in May, Sunil has put together a nice level loaded supply plan. We end up increasing our supply, and we're now going to be ready for that extra demand in May. So again, because we saw it out far enough into the future, and Sunil was able to see in the S&OP template, he was able to see out to May and June, he was able to prepare for that extra inventory that will be immediately required. So our next scenario, our last scenario, we've got inventory going negative. Now, it's impossible to have negative inventory. That's just not a possible situation. Also, we've got a shipment plan that is shipping more than what we have. So notice how our starting inventory is going negative. Well, that's also not possible. We cannot ship what we don't have. So this plan here is an unrealistic plan. We've got to change a couple of things possibly, but the very first thing we need to do is we need to constrain the shipping plan until we find out what the problem is and we fix the source of the problem. So the shipping plan, because we can't ship what we don't have, that's number one. We've got to constrain the shipping plan. Now, we need to check with Sunil to see why we have this problem? Why are we not able to get our supply plan up so that we can match our demand? Why has our supply plan dropped? Notice how it has dropped in December and January. It has gone down to 35 from the 40 it usually is. So Sunil, can you please explain this? Why do we have a problem here in December and January?
Sarika. So we are actually, since we are at the end of holiday season in December, we are planning for maintenance. This maintenance has to happen in the end of December, because if we do not do it right now, the cost per units would grow up due to scrap inefficiencies and bad quality of the machinery. So the output would be very less. So we are planning to take this maintenance in December and January. So after till this maintenance, we would have less supply. But the good news is, like, due to this maintenance, so after this maintenance, we will have increased capacity, so we can produce more supply starting from February. And now I would want to also communicate to our demand planner, Subjit, not to overpromise or plan any promotions that's till in February, so that we can avoid the low supply situation as well.
Sure, Sunil. I think I'm aware of the situation, and there's nothing much we can do about it. So we will keep an eye on demand, and we will ensure that we are not overcommitting or we are not running promotions that could spike the demand during these periods. But I hope that we could catch up very quickly after the equipment maintenance is done, so that we can go back to our customers with our promises. But thanks for the heads up.
And a perfect example of a good collaboration in an S&OP meeting. So again, you know ahead of time, you know well ahead of time that there is going to be this situation. We've already heard all sorts of problems in the plant with faulty product coming off the line. We've got downtime in the machinery. So the maintenance has to happen. So let's plan for it. This is exactly what Sunil and Sarbajit are doing, is they're talking together, they're collaborating to make sure that we can do that maintenance, which is absolutely critical to do, so that our quality of our product goes up, or it stays up, and then we get the product coming off in the numbers that we're expecting. So it is something that both departments have to work together on, because it is a necessary evil. We do have to maintain that equipment. So thank you for the collaboration. So that's the end of our scenarios. I hope you got an idea of what sort of discussions go into an S&OP meeting. In summary, it's critical to have the right data on your S&OP template, and it's critical to have correct data on your S&OP template. And again, you've got to make sure that once you get an S&OP process going, you've got to make sure that people stick with it. And if the data is not correct, people are going to stop using it. If there appear to be a problem in the trends, make sure that you're identifying the source of the problem and not the symptom. Keep digging until you know exactly what is causing your problem. Avoid knee-jerk reactions that lead to nervousness in all the plans. So that's why you've got that frozen zone, to make sure you don't react and cause everybody else to have confusion. If the problem numbers are yours, make sure you come to the meeting prepared to explain the cause of the situation, possible plans to rectify the problem, and provide a timeline for when the numbers will be back on track. Stick to a formal monthly S&OP cycle. Do not cancel them. And note that the sooner everybody sees a problem or a change in the trend, the quicker and the smoother everyone can react. Thank you very much. That ends our webinar. We'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Erica, and thanks, Sabarjit, as well as Sunil, for introducing us to the sales and operations planning. And I believe we actually do have a few questions here. So I think the first one is actually asking, we feel that our supply is actually very often constrained by a key raw material that we can't control. Can this S&OP process help with addressing such a problem?
Yes.
Erica, you want me to take that, or?
Go ahead, Sarbajit. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we do face these problems sometimes, like that's something that we have seen in our experience. Typically, an organization will definitely not want to lose sales, right? So they will try to do everything to make those numbers. Like sometimes they would want the supply side to be more ready, anticipate the demand, and have those raw materials available in excess, right? And sometimes, it could be a long-term R&D strategy to have substitutes, right? So these are some things that organizations can do. But I think, it's true, and I agree that sometimes there are hard constraints and you cannot really do much about it. So in those cases, what we have seen our customers do is they prioritize their product mix, and that could be done based on a revenue or the margins that they generate. And what they do is they ensure that the limited raw materials that they have are best used to meet their overall company objectives, right? So since they don't have unlimited supply, they want, or rather they have limited or constrained supply, they would like to use them for uh, the ones that is most useful for their organization, right? So that is pretty much what they do. But in these cases, there is one thing that we have to take into mind, because since you're not going to meet all the sales, it is very important to get the sales people in confidence, because they will not be happy if they are not told that this is the strategy that we are taking, and you might be missing out on certain sales because of this constrained availability. So they have to be taken into confidence, and they have to be told that certain demands cannot be met, and you have to have a plan to address this sort of a problem, right? So this is something that we have seen, and this is this type of a ranking and scoring and optimizing the overall value of what you have as raw materials to generate what your objectives are. I believe that is often a strategy that is adopted, and that many times helps. So I hope I could answer that.
Great. Thanks, Rajit. That was a very comprehensive answer. We do have a couple more questions. So there's another one here that actually talks about them having a few last-minute requests in the frozen zone, and this frozen zone is usually not respected. Just wondering if having an S&OP process will be able to help them out.
I can take this one, Christine. Yes, absolutely. An S&OP process would help you out in something like that. And what you would see there is you would see the future plan of what's happening, and you could, counteract any last minute changes by saying that, the shipment can go out next month or whatever. But in saying that, I know it's very difficult, and it's very easy to break the rules of the frozen zone. And what you'll find is it costs a lot of money to break those rules. And the way to stop people making changes in that frozen zone is start documenting the costs, the extra costs that it's costing you to make those changes. And as soon as you see those costs, I mean, you'd be surprised at the expedite costs that you have. Take a look at the expedite costs that you had last year, and some of you will be surprised at how high they are. Then look at your overtime costs, your labor disruptions. All of those, there's hard costs in there, and there's soft costs. And not to mention, if you do jerk around people's schedules in the current period, you're now calling people in for overtime, you're disrupting people's family schedules. So there's a lot of soft costs as well. You get a lot of unhappy employees. So in an S&OP world, you can actually plan to take care of that problem at a future, either at a future state, or you would notice that problem earlier and be able to accommodate. So in the S&OP world, you'd be able, maybe you do have to make a change, maybe it is a critical change, but with all the data that you have in your S&OP template, you'd be able to go back to the demand planner and say, is there another order I can change? Is there something I can change to make this happen? or is it too costly for me to make that change? So the best way to control that, I'll just kind of summarize, is to look at the cost of what it cost you, and that's what's going to change people's mind.
Great. Thanks, Erica. That was very helpful information. I think I'm very conscious of time, so maybe we'll just take one more question here. This is actually relating to them having their sales and forecasting planning usually being a part of their financial forecasting process. So based on your experience, and working with customers, can this actually be an integrated process for S&OP like you've described so far?
Absolutely. I mean, finance is one of the pillars. It's finance, supply, and demand. But finance is one of the pillars. And if you're working on the finance numbers, it's absolutely critical that the other departments are in line with that. Finance is going to come up with a number that they expect to have so that they can make capital expenditures. They can, do different things that they're planning on doing with new products, new product introduction. So they've got reasons for a certain budget that they want to have. Now, in S&OP, you would be trying to meet those numbers. So definitely, they should all be working together. All three of those pillars should be working together to come up with a plan that finance would be happy with. So absolutely, S&OP is very critical in that whole process of financial budgeting.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Sabarjit, and thank you, Sunil. I mean, I think we still have a few questions, but again, conscious of time. So we'll get back to you guys. We'll get to you guys personally and be in touch to answer any more questions that you have. But in the meantime, we're going to end the session for today. Thank you once again for attending the session. And we thank every one of you for your participation, as well as to the team at Keansa for putting this together. We look forward to seeing you at our next session, potentially sometime in mid-May.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of day or evening. Please feel free to send us any questions that you have if we haven't answered them. Thank you.